All right, and I will turn it over to Lauren. Lauren?
Thanks so much, Craig. Um, Making sure everyone can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, Helping Communities and Nature Thrive in a Changing Climate, presented by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC. My name is Lauren Steinberg. I'm a climate policy analyst in the DEC Office of Climate Change. I'm joined today by some of my colleagues in several divisions of the agency, and we have a pretty packed agenda for you today, so we're going to get right into it. Next slide. So this webinar is part of an ongoing webinar series presented in partnership with the state agencies and authorities leading the development of New York State's Adaptation and Resilience Plan. These are the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, Department of State, DEC, and Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. During this webinar, you'll hear an overview of the state's adaptation and resilience planning process and learn how you can stay informed on the plan's development and opportunities to provide feedback. You'll also hear presentations from several DEC divisions that'll showcase available resources that support local and regional climate adaptation and resilience. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentations. Please feel free to submit questions for our presenters through that Q&A function throughout the webinar. If we can, we'll answer those as they come in, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can at the end of all the presentations. Next slide. So to set some context for this webinar, we want to think about the question, why do we need to adapt and build resilience to climate change? We're seeing the changing climate drive more frequent and intense impacts across New York State caused by worsening climate hazards like extreme heat events, severe storms, droughts, wildfires, and rising sea levels. Heavy rainfall has caused severe flooding in many parts of New York State this summer alone, including the record-setting rainfall in New York City last week. In addition, the catastrophic flooding that occurred in Texas and New Mexico earlier this month is a stark reminder of the intensity with which climate impacts can occur. Climate adaptation and resilience are essential to reduce risks to and impacts on our ecosystems, infrastructure, the economy, and the health and safety of New Yorkers. Next slide. So again, why adaptation and resilience? Climate adaptation is the adjustment to current and future climate change and its impacts and aims to reduce risks and uncertainties and find opportunities with changing conditions. Climate resilience is the capacity of individuals, communities, governments, all to adapt to changing conditions and prepare for, withstand, and rapidly recover from climate hazards. Effective adaptation contributes to a community's resilience by building capacity to survive, adapt, and thrive in short-term or long-term climate impacts, and is most effective when it encourages community participation and engagement. Climate adaptation and resilience strategies can encompass a wide variety of approaches, from policy to engineered and nature-based features. The conservation, sustainable management, and restoration of ecosystems and ecosystem services can help communities adapt and be resilient to the impacts of climate change while providing many co-benefits like cleaner air and cleaner water. Next slide. So before we get into our presentations, a reminder that this DEC webinar is the third webinar of the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan Summer Series. Each webinar is hosted by one of the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan lead agencies and showcases currently available resources supported by the host agency. NYSERDA and Department of State's webinars were held over the past couple of weeks, and we encourage you to check out the recordings of those if you missed them. The final summer webinar will be hosted by the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services on August 19th about the Mitigate and Why platform and data-driven planning to improve disaster resilience. You can find a link to register for the August webinar as well as recordings for all the webinars on the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan webpage. We'll be putting a link to that in the chat, but you can also access that webpage through the QR code that is on your screen. Throughout this webinar, we're also going to be asking some polling questions to help us learn about your priorities and needs related to adaptation and resilience, and we very much appreciate your participation in those polling questions. Next slide. So this brings us to our first polling question. Why did you join today's webinar? So you'll see the polling questions appear in a window on the right side of your screen. If you don't see that polling window appear, you can open it manually by clicking on that little circle with the 3 dots in it at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and select polling. We'll have each question open for about a minute or two, and please be sure to hit that submit button when the question, when you finish answering the question for each question. Some of these questions are going to be open-ended and others will have like multiple choice answers. So we want to hear from you. Why did you join today's webinar? Was there a particular program or topic that you were hoping to hear more about? Let us know. This poll question is open-ended, so go ahead and type in your answer and then hit submit. And while everyone is doing that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Audrey Kropp, to give an overview of the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan process. We can go to the next slide, and Audrey, you can take it away whenever you're ready. You might be on mute, Audrey, if you're speaking.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you. As Lauren mentioned, my name is Audrey Kropp, and I'm a climate policy analyst with the DEC Office of Climate Change. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you about a very important initiative New York State is taking to strengthen its efforts to adapt to climate change and to build climate resilience. While each of these webinars in this series is unique, this presentation is covered in all of them and will include the remainder of the polling questions. Next slide, please. During Earth Week 2025, Governor Hochul announced the launch of a statewide climate adaptation and resilience plan. This initiative is intended to provide state and local partners with a shared direction and to foster collaboration across all regions of the state. This will help ensure New Yorkers are better equipped and prepared for the impacts of climate change, like devastating storms that cause more than $1 billion in damages annually in New York State. There's a wide range of climate resilience and adaptation planning initiatives currently being implemented statewide, many of which are led by individual state agencies. Some examples are shown on this slide. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide, please. Some examples are shown on this slide with direct links that are available on the DEC New York State Adaptation and Resilience Plan, or NYSARP, website. These efforts will continue through this broader adaptation and resilience planning initiative. The NYSARP seeks to build upon rather than duplicate these efforts. It will serve to guide our ongoing climate resiliency across the state and unify these efforts under a common vision and principles to better support state and local adaptation to climate change. Next slide, please. At Governor Hochul's direction, New York State has prioritized helping communities prepare for and adapt to current and future climate impacts through a variety of initiatives, resources, and programs. The 4 core agencies leading the development of the comprehensive NYSARP all play a significant role in adaptation and resilience planning across the state and are closely coordinating on this process. The NYSARP will be developed in several phases. The first step, or foundational phase, involves an analysis of existing New York State adaptation and resilience planning efforts. This analysis will link together existing planning, establish a baseline of understanding, and help identify gaps in adaptation planning across the state. At the end of this analysis, New York State will utilize the findings to develop a framework that unifies future efforts, including a collective vision, principles, and resources. To achieve the vision and principles, early actions for the state to undertake to implement the framework in the next phase will be identified. The actions will be informed by a coordinated strategy to ensure that state agencies, community-based organizations, and partners are well positioned to increase resilience and build adaptive capacity across New York communities, and ensuring tools and resources are accessible to help communities thrive in a changing climate. Next slide, please. So here we are at our next polling question. When you think about the future of New York State's climate, what impacts are your biggest concerns? Please select your top 2 concerns. Damage to critical infrastructure, like roads and electricity supply, etc. Public health impacts, which may include greater incidence of disease and extreme heat illness or asthma due to degraded air quality, challenges with food production and supply, degraded natural resources, which may include water quality or air quality. Or if you have another suggestion, please submit it in the Q&A now. Remember, the Q&A and the poll can be accessed with the 3 dots on the bottom right, and you can submit your answers as I continue on with the presentation. Next slide, please. The NISARP framework is intended to guide adaptation planning and implementation by articulating a collective vision and principles supportive of local efforts, providing available resources, and identifying early actions for the state to undertake. The framework will be informed by input from local government staff, vulnerable populations, and adaptation and resilience experts, among others. And the draft framework will be made available for public comment at the end of 2025. Goals guiding the development of the framework include establishing a coordinated strategy to increase resilience and build adaptive capacity across New York communities, developing tools and resources to help communities thrive in a changing climate, and helping New Yorkers better understand what the state is doing to adapt to climate change. The framework will be actionable and equitable, and these high-level goals will help set New York up for success in advancing the near-term actions that are identified. Next slide, please. Here we are at our next polling question. Imagine you want to find information or resources to help you understand the threats of climate change and prepare yourself, your family, your business, and/or your community. Where would you look first? New York State websites, a dedicated climate resilience organization, a general internet search like Google, maybe a personal contact or friend who works in the climate field, or published media like a book or an article. And again, if you have another idea, please submit it in the Q&A. Next slide, please. An important component of the NISARP development is engagement and feedback from key stakeholders who have an impact on the future of adaptation and resilience efforts across New York State. These audiences include New York State agencies, local governments, partners, and community organizations, as well as the general public. These audiences will be engaged throughout the framework development process in order to ensure as many perspectives and needs are taken into consideration as possible, as well as transparency to New Yorkers. Next slide, please. And here we are at our next poll question. What do you or your organization need more of to better support your efforts to advance climate adaptation and resilience action at the local level? Again, here, please pick your top 2 needs. Resilient infrastructure, that's roads or the electric grid, educational resources, refined and improved systems and policies like disaster response or building codes, centralized guidance, resource and tools, creative funding and financing options. And again, if you have another option, add it to the Q&A. Next slide, please. During the foundational phase, the state will engage with local partners, community leaders, practitioners, and experts in developing the framework. New York State will strive for all interested community members to have the opportunity to learn about and contribute to the framework's development through a combination of standing adaptation advisory panels, targeted focus groups, webinars, and a public comment period. This will help inform the needs that should be addressed and the actions New York State should take to advance adaptation and resilience efforts. This webinar series, presented by each of the core agencies leading the NISARP process, is part of that community and stakeholder engagement. The state is also planning additional webinars near the public comment period. Information on all the webinars, including registration, will be released on the NISARP website in the coming months. You can also subscribe to receive email updates. Please note that the milestones on this slide are not exhaustive and of the ways that New York State is engaging with community members in phase 1, and the timeline may shift as we continue to develop the framework. Next slide, please. And here we are at our final polling question. What key principles or priorities guide your local adaptation and resilience planning efforts? Lastly, please select your top 2 needs. Reducing the most risk or potential harm, addressing the needs of vulnerable communities, efficient use of government resources, coordinated and centralized approach to action, informed action by local governments, community-based organizations, and New Yorkers, or using the latest climate science information. And of course, if you have another idea, you can submit it in the Q&A. Thank you for participating. Your input is very important and will help inform both the development of the framework and the implementation of the NISARP. Next slide, please. So remember, to receive updates directly, you can subscribe to the DEC Delivers mailing list and select the option titled Climate Adaptation and Resilience Plan, or you can check in on the NISARP website. Thank you very much for your attention, and please submit any general questions you have in the Q&A, and I'll hand it back over to Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Audrey. We can go to the next slide, please. Great. So as you've just heard, climate adaptation and resilience is a priority for New York State, and adaptation and resilience has been and continues to be a priority within the work being done by DEC. DEC's mission is to conserve, improve, and protect New York's natural resources and environment, and to prevent, abate, and control water, land, and air pollution, to enhance the health, safety, and welfare of the people of the state and their overall economic and social well-being. This mission guides how DEC is advancing climate adaptation and resilience in New York. As you'll hear from our speakers today, climate adaptation and resilience is integrated into how DEC divisions are working with and supporting communities of all kinds. As a lead agency in the state's Adaptation and Resilience Plan, DEC's capacity to advance statewide and local climate adaptation will continue to grow. Next slide. DEC is providing leadership in climate adaptation and resilience through many programs, initiatives, and efforts that aim to protect New York State's land, air, and water resources, as well as its communities and residents. For instance, DEC is the main administrator of the Climate Smart Communities program and coordinates the 25 Million Trees initiatives, which directly support communities to take actions that provide local benefits. DEC serves a leading role in the implementation of state planning efforts, such as the Extreme Heat Action Plan, and in implementing regulations such as the Community Risk and Resiliency Act. DEC manages numerous grant programs which help communities plan and take actions to adapt and build local climate resilience. DEC also manages Environmental Bond Act funds, which requires that disadvantaged communities receive at least 35% with a goal of 40% of the benefits of funding. And what you see here on the slide is not at all a complete list of the ways in which DEC supports adaptation and resilience across the state. You'll hear about some of these programs and initiatives on the webinar today and find out where you can learn more. Next slide. So this brings us to DEC's Resource Showcase, where you'll learn much more about adaptation and resilience resources available to communities from DEC. The presenters today will share resources from DEC's Office of Climate Change, Office of Environmental Justice, Division of Water, Division of Lands and Forests, and the New York State Environmental Bond Act. So now I'd like to introduce Deanna Sullivan in the Office of Climate Change to kick off our Resources Showcase, and I think we can move to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deanna Sullivan. I am a climate policy analyst in the DEC Office of Climate Change. OCC was created in 2007 to lead the development of programs and policies that mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and help New York communities and individuals adapt to impacts from a changing climate. OCC provides leadership and guidance on climate action to DEC and the state. Since its creation, OCC has focused its work toward meeting the following general goals: contributing to the reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions, advancing climate change adaptation and resilience, and driving local government and community climate action. Next slide, please. OCC has many focus areas to see those goals are met. Some examples are greenhouse gas mitigation, adaptation and resilience, community engagement, technical assistance and grants, as well as outreach and communication. Greenhouse gas mitigation area is primarily focused on implementing the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and conducting additional research and developing tools to improve New York State's ability to accurately measure emissions and build effective reduction strategies. The adaptation and resilience area assists communities in building capacity and supporting plans that enable communities to anticipate, prepare, prevent, and recover from the impacts of climate change within reduced severities, costs, and inequalities. Examples include the Extreme Heat Action Plan and Community Risk and Resilience Implementation. The community engagement and grants area engages with local governments through Climate Smart Communities programs and provides resources, funding, and standards to build local capacity for mitigating and adapting to climate change in a way that is accessible and celebrates local leaders. Outreach and communication is an important component in all areas that include communicating, marketing, and outreach efforts to inform the public, media, and key stakeholders about climate change information, policies, and activities at OCC. Next slide, please. OCC understands the importance both mitigation and adaptation play in climate change action in what we like to call the 2 feet of action. On one foot, we have mitigation, and on the other, we have adaptation. Integrating these actions can create more efficient and effective opportunities for communities and the state as a whole. An example of this is ecosystem-based adaptation, such as natural shorelines, increasing storm resilience, and maintaining or increasing carbon stocks. Without integration, adaptation and mitigation actions could undermine each other, create unnecessary trade-offs, or result in maladaptations that increase negative impacts. My colleague Joanna will now go over specific resources for local adaptation and resilience. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Deanna. My name is Joanna Ostrut, an Excelsior Fellow in OCC. One resource we have is the Climate Smart Communities Program, or CSC, an interagency program that is administered by DEC. The Climate Smart Communities framework helps governments in local areas make progress on creating healthy and equitable places to live. It helps local governments take action on climate from planning to implementation. The certification part of CSC recognizes the leadership of communities taking climate actions, providing guidance and support for this to local governments. Communities can register as a CSC by pledging to reduce emissions and adapt. To be certified, communities must demonstrate an active task force to lead climate action. It's a very popular program with high participation throughout the state. Next slide. The grant program is offered by OCC, and it's also for Climate Smart Communities. This funding program offers municipalities ways to implement projects focused on adaptation and greenhouse gas mitigation. Eligible projects may include ones using nature-based features or reducing flood risk. We also accept planning and assessment projects that can help achieve CSC certification, such as creating climate action plans. This year, eligible project types newly include refrigerant management and levee certification under FEMA. Engineering and design feasibility studies are also now eligible, which can help projects meet design and study criteria for capital funding. The current cycle is accepting applications through July 31st. Next slide. Another component of the CSC program is the regional coordinators. These coordinators work in every state region and provide free guidance and technical assistance to local governments working on climate action. They conduct outreach, planning, and more. Next slide. Next, I'll say a bit about our extreme heat work. New York State released the Extreme Heat Action Plan in 2024, which includes 49 actions for the state to support adaptation and resilience to heat. The June 2025 Progress Update includes new and improved resources for communities, such as state support for funding for cool homes and buildings. The update also describes state progress on the heat plan actions. Another OCC project is mapping urban heat islands, where heat exposure can be high in built-up areas. These maps are intended to help communities plan for heat exposure on the neighborhood level, used with other local knowledge. Preliminary maps show temperatures in state communities that use recent historical data are now available online, and final maps will be available in 2026. Next slide. The Community Risk and Resiliency Act, or CARA, requires that future climate conditions are considered in certain state decision-making, including in major permits and some funding decisions. CARA authorizes DEC to require mitigation of climate risks to any natural resource, public infrastructure services, disadvantaged communities, or private property not owned by the applicant. The law required DEC to adopt science-based projections of sea level rise by regulation. Additionally, Department of State and DEC developed model local laws about climate risk for communities to increase resilience. These agencies have also released guidance documents on CARA that help communities adapt and plan for climate risks. Next slide. Finally, here's our contact information at OCC. Please reach out if you want more information about our work or have questions. Thanks. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Joanna and Deanna with Office of Climate Change. Now we're going to hear from the Office of Environmental Justice. So over to you folks whenever you are ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Riley, and I'm a climate policy analyst in the Office of Environmental Justice. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our programming as it relates to adaptation. I think the top line is that, as we go about developing this plan, the how we go about it is as important as that we do. Next slide. So we have 4 main areas in which we work to address environmental issues that affect vulnerable communities. So we provide EJ policy and regulations through the Climate Justice Working Group, which we facilitate, which develops the disadvantaged communities criteria, which I then go ahead and manage. We are in the process of putting together the Permanent Environmental Justice Advisory Group and the Environmental Justice Interagency Coordinating Council. We have a grant program, which my colleague Marilyn Moore will speak more on in a moment, that include air pollution mitigation grants, community environmental education center grants, and community impact grants. We also have a hand in permitting regulations through CP 29 and the EJ siting law, and we have a public participation wing as well. Next slide. So disadvantaged communities is my program area, and I think is the most relevant to this venue. We have a comprehensive and iteratively reviewed and developed mapping of the conditions of disadvantage in New York State, through which we identify the people and places that are most vulnerable and vulnerable to climate change as well. We also have PJAs, potential environmental justice areas. Those were created by CP 29 and our legacy model for identifying potentially vulnerable communities. We have EJ grant programs, which are resource opportunities to address pollution burdens and inequities in vulnerable communities. And the EJ siting law, which was a recent update to SEEKR that requires the consideration for disadvantaged communities while citing potentially pollution generating facilities. Next slide. So DACs are areas that are identified by the methodological application of indicators, which are environmental burdens, climate change risk, and socioeconomic vulnerability, and public health outcomes. So right now, DACs use 45 indicators to identify 35% of the census tracts in New York as DACs, and the Climate Justice Working Group is required to review the DAC criteria annually, at which point they may make changes. Next slide. So the 45 indicators are organized based into factors, which are like similar concepts. And one factor, potential climate change risks, I think is really relevant for adaptation and resiliency work. And that includes flooding in coastal and tidally influenced areas, flooding in inland areas, projected days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, low vegetative cover, and drive time to hospitals and urgent care. Next slide, please. So we recently had our first annual review of the DAC criteria. The Climate Justice Working Group reviewed in 2024 and voted to make a couple changes. This resulted in updating the indicators to use the most recent data available, updating the maps to be based on the 2020 census rather than the 2010, and a small change to how proximity to landfills work. And they considered adding other indicators, but decided not to at this time. Next slide. PJAs were created by CP 29 in 2003, and they are a model for incorporating EJ concerns in the permit review process. They're based entirely on racial and economic characteristics. They're less specific than DACs, but they're still useful because they identify that positive relationship between the occurrence of vulnerable populations and pollution burdens. And we are expecting an update to PJAs in late 2025 or 2026. Next slide. EJ siting law we just passed, and as I said, it requires lead agencies to consider whether an action may cause or increase disproportionate pollution burden on a DAC as a part of the determination of significance process, and includes an evaluation of whether that proposed action could require an EIS, an environmental impact statement. Next slide. As a part of that, we developed the DACIT tool, which comparatively, it's a comparative tool to assess relative pollution burdens. And it's a tool to help agencies assess disproportionality. And it's based on existing burdens and vulnerabilities as compared to relevant non-DACs. And next slide. So for this slide, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Marilyn Moore, who's going to speak about our grant programming. Marilyn?
Thank you so much, Oliver. Good afternoon, Marilyn Moore with OEJ Grants. The Office of Environmental Justice provides grants to not-for-profit 501c3 organizations and tribal organizations that are located in and serve disadvantaged communities and potential environmental justice areas. These grants support communities addressing environmental harms and health hazards while involving and educating communities on their work and mitigating the burdens they seek to address. Next slide. I manage our yearly offering of the Community Impact Grant Program that awards not-for-profits and tribal organizations up to $200,000 to deliver benefits to disadvantaged communities and potential environmental justice areas through a wide range of project types that you see on the right side here. This opportunity is available now until August 13th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're constantly updating our programs based on feedback to meet community needs and state directives. Next slide. Highlighting two more of our programs, the Green Jobs for Youth opportunity will be available later this year. This funds 17 to 24-year-olds to participate in new or existing job training programs in green industries and supports the development of a skilled workforce toward our just transition goals outlined by the CLCPA. And the Community Environmental Education Centers grant. This program closed earlier this year. Organizations have been selected to lead the new construction or renovation of a facility that inspires exploration, discovery, and learning about the environment, all of which will support resilience programming across the state. Next slide. This concludes the presentation for the Office of Environmental Justice, and Oliver and I thank you kindly for your time. Please feel free to reach out to us with the information on this slide here and check out the QR codes that lead you to our grants website and the Disadvantaged Communities Assessment Tool. I'll hand it back over to Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Office of Environmental Justice. And a quick reminder to all of our attendees, if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A feature of the webinar. And you can find that in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, a little circle with 3 dots in it. Go ahead and put your questions in. Great, so now we're going to hear about Resilient New York, and I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, and we can go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Lauren. As Lauren said, I'm Shannon Dewar. I work with the Division of Water as the Climate Adaptation Specialist for the Resilient New York program. And I'll be speaking today about the climate adaptation work being supported by Resilient New York and the Resilient New York Watersheds Grant Program. Next slide. So we'll start with Resilient New York, and next slide. So Resilient New York program is a partnership between DEC, OGS, and consulting engineers to produce flood studies for communities in high-risk watersheds. These studies make recommendations for projects that are likely to reduce flood risk, make adjacent communities more resilient to climate change, and improve stream and floodplain ecology. Resilient New York reports are stamped by licensed professional engineers and provide a sufficient basis for grant applications. Communities with Resilient New York recommendations are also able to access expert assistance from the Resilient New York program at DEC for all phases of implementation, from identifying funding sources to impact evaluation. Next slide. So while several pilot studies date back to 2014, Resilient New York was officially established as a statewide program in 2018. To date, we've completed 58 flood studies and have 18 studies currently underway or scheduled to begin within the next year. We're also working to identify additional high-risk watersheds for future study. The red watersheds you see here are all those with completed or upcoming studies. The blue watersheds have comparable studies, which I'll cover in a moment. Next slide. So Resilient New York study recommendations can include gray infrastructure modifications such as bridge or culvert right sizing, but where possible, they emphasize nature-based interventions like dam removal and floodplain restoration that have greater adaptive potential and added environmental and social benefits. Next slide. So a moment ago, I alluded to comparable studies. Within the next year, Resilient New York will have completed studies in about 75 high-risk watersheds, but New York has several hundred similarly sized watersheds. Some communities would prefer to arrange their own study, so we've created a generic scope of work that localities can use to commission high-quality studies that incorporate climate change projections into industry-standard hydraulic modeling. Studies that meet the Resilient New York standard are eligible to apply for project implementation funding through the Resilient Watersheds Grant Program. Next slide. And we will present on the Resilient Watersheds Grant Program. Next slide. So the Resilient Watersheds Grant is a competitive grant for implementation of flood mitigation projects that are recommended in a Resilient New York or comparable flood study. Funding comes from the Environmental Bond Act and is administered by the Environmental Facilities Corporation. The first window to apply for RWG just closed in June, and we anticipate offering this grant again for at least 4 more years. With only a few exceptions, RWG can fund almost all of the types of projects recommended in a Resilient New York standard study, and the types we can't fund, we can assist with identifying alternative funding opportunities. Next slide. The Resilient New York team is currently scoring our first round of applications. As the map indicates, we have applicants from all over the state. Among those we received, we've identified 30 eligible applications covering a total of 52 individual flood adaptation projects. We expect to announce awards within the next few months, and we anticipate commencement of the first RWG-funded flood adaptation projects in 2026. Next slide. So, in addition to the Resilient New York program, I'd like to take a moment to highlight another interesting adaptation-related effort from the DEC Division of Water. Next slide. The Floodplain Management section has partnered with the Northeast Regional Climate Center at Cornell University to update models indicating the anticipated intensity, duration, and frequency of precipitation in New York under climate change. This project will create updated IDF curves for all of New York's counties for both moderate and high emissions climate scenarios for 2 different time spans. In addition to developing new curves and making recommendations for how they can be applied, the curves will be made available to inform design standards so that new and modified infrastructure is better suited to withstand increasingly intense precipitation. The new curves are expected to be available by early next summer. And next slide. If you're interested in learning more about Resilient New York or the Resilient Watersheds Grant Program, or if you have questions, you can reach out to our team at resilientny@dec.ny.gov. If you have questions about the new IDF curves, you can reach out to the Floodplain Management section. And thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. And now we are going to hear from DEC Division of Lands and Forests. We can move to the next slide. And Lands and Forests, you can take it away when you are ready.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Jess Cancelleri. I'm the Forest Health Program Coordinator within the division. The Division of Lands and Forests manages nearly 5 million acres of land, including the Adirondack and Catskill Forest Preserves, state forests, unique areas, state nature and historic preserves, and conservation easements. Climate adaptation and resilience are at the heart of everything we do, from restoring resilient forests and conserving biodiversity to guiding sustainable land use practices. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do like in a broader sense within our division, and then I'll talk about specific community resources. So our state forests in particular make up about 800,000 acres and are managed for multiple uses, including timber production. We use sustainable forestry practices for that timber production that promote long-term health and climate resilience. This includes practices like tree thinning to reduce competition and increase tree health, prescribe fire to reduce wildfire risk and maintain fire-adapted forest ecosystems, maintaining seed orchards to ensure a consistent supply of native seed sources, and planting native and climate resilient tree species in our plantations. We also manage invasive species, and we do silvicultural treatments that promote forest health, wildlife habitat, and natural regeneration. We conduct a ton of research on state lands that seeks to understand how climate change impacts our forests and what we can do to better mitigate those impacts. And we establish demonstration sites to test and showcase what we've learned and share that information with land managers. And of course, we work within a vast network of partners to ensure we're aware and practicing the latest science and best management practices. We also look ahead through a lot of long-term planning and the development of new initiatives. So Our 25 Million Tree Initiative, that's a statewide campaign led by Division of Lands and Forests to plant 25 million trees across public and private lands by 2033. It supports climate resilience, air and water quality, urban cooling, and wildlife habitat. It includes upgrades to our Saratoga Tree Nursery to modernize the facility and bolster seedling production. It incorporates some of our grant funding opportunities for communities that support tree planting and reforestation, which I'll talk about in a sec. And it includes public engagement opportunities like youth and community tree planting events. Our open space conservation plan helps forests adapt to climate change by guiding strategic land protection and management across New York State. It's a joint initiative developed by DEC and state parks, Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, as well as regional committees that include municipal representatives and citizens. And it essentially prioritizes land protection in areas that store carbon, maintain biodiversity, and connect habitats. It preserves large, intact forests and riparian zones, which buffer against flooding, extreme heat, and drought. The New York State Reforestation Plan is a comprehensive statewide roadmap designed to bolster climate resilience by expanding and renewing forest cover. It includes ambitious reforestation goals, including the establishment of 1.7 million acres of forest by 2040. Next slide, please. So the way that we support people and communities is largely through grant opportunities and technical assistance. So our core grant program provides competitive funding to expand, restore, and create forested natural areas in or near urban communities across New York. It funds tree planting and forest restoration on public lands and publicly accessible nonprofit lands in urban and suburban areas. And it supports a whole suite of forest management activities, prioritizing disadvantaged communities or those with existing low tree cover. Our urban and community forestry grants funded by the Inflation Reduction Act support local efforts to enhance urban green spaces, particularly in underserved communities. There's up to $10 million in funding to execute community forest management plans, address ash tree decline as a result of emerald ash borer, and support planting and shade initiatives to promote urban cooling. And finally, the ELF grant, we still have a couple more here, supports large-scale reforestation on private lands. It provides funding for planting trees on non-forested private land of 5 acres or more, and also includes a whole suite of forest management activities. And that is open to non-industrial private landowners, land trusts, nonprofits, planting on behalf of landowners, and private forestry businesses. The Regenerate New York program is a forestry cost share initiative that supports private landowners in restoring, regenerating, or creating forests. And that covers 90% of project expenses related to these efforts. And finally, the invasive species grants. That targets direct control of invasive species, prevention and detection. And we recently added a restoration and resiliency category that will provide $1.5 million in funding to nonprofits and municipalities to promote restoration, post-invasive species impact. Next slide. And finally, we have a whole suite of services that you can read more about on our website. Our Forest Health Research Lab provides free diagnostic services to the public. So if you're having issues with pests and diseases, tree decline, you can email us at the email shown there, and we will help you figure out what is going on. We also provide a lot of fact sheets and best management practices online. We support the IMAP Invasive Citizen Science tool, where the public can enter records of invasives and also see what's going on in their area. And I keep bringing up invasives because they're so related to climate change, and they are being exacerbated through climate change impacts. And of course, our regional foresters do site visits and will provide consultations and advice to land managers. And we have so many other tools, including finally the tree tracker at the bottom, which if you are out there planting a tree, please get on our website and record it, and it will be counted towards our 25 million tree initiative. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Now I would like to hand it over to Susanna Randall, Chief Resiliency Officer. Over to you, Susanna.
Hey, thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. As you know, my name is Susanna Randall. I'm the Chief Resiliency Officer here at DEC. I also manage the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act of 2022, or you've heard referred to by some of my colleagues, the Bond Act. Go ahead and go to the next slide, if you would, please. Back in November of 2022, voters from across the state came together and overwhelmingly supported the Bond Act. What the Bond Act does is it provides really a historic investment across the state in resilience projects, adaptation and resilience projects, I should add. These $4.2 billion can be programmed through 4 general categories. And I'll note that there's not a Bond Act application per se. You've heard a couple of references throughout the presentation today to using Bond Act funds in DEC programs. The same is true across other state agencies and authorities and other Bond Act entities that we work with to move Bond Act funds out into communities to implement capital investments, capital projects, things that we can bond for. So these types of projects, as I said, fall into 4 broad categories: climate change mitigation, restoration and flood risk reduction, water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure, and open space and land conservation and recreation investments. There's an additional $300 million that's included in the Bond Act that can be programmed through either the restoration and flood risk reduction category or the water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure category. And so we have this construct of four categories. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Through which we're investing to achieve our priorities, or what I like to refer to as the cornerstones of our investments, what really anchor us in how we're promoting adaptation and resilience across the state and how we respond to and adapt to climate change. So it's no surprise, I don't think, that mitigating and adapting to climate change is one of these cornerstone priorities. Protecting our natural resources is another. We think about safeguarding land and air and water and access to land, air, and water and farmland, making sure that we're ensuring the health of our environment. I think the other two also come very easily and understandably as cornerstones. Advancing environmental justice. You heard from one of my colleagues talking about disadvantaged communities and really diving into a little bit of the background of how those disadvantaged community maps are produced, really looking at how decades of disproportionate burden has been placed on some of our communities across the state. And we know that climate change is a threat multiplier. So we're investing in these communities, putting money back in areas that have been hardest hit. As I think someone also noted, at least 35% of the Bond Act will be invested in projects that directly benefit disadvantaged communities. We have a goal of 40% of those funds being invested in that manner. And when I say of the funds, it's of that $4.2 billion corpus or total fund. And finally, creating jobs. There are significant provisions in the Bond Act legislation itself, and you can easily access that. I'll show you in a minute on our website, and other information about the Bond Act. Some of the provisions include apprenticeship programs, prevailing wage, project labor agreements, for example. Go to the next slide, please. So we've created a website to really a one-stop shop for Environmental Bond Act. As I noted, their funds are pushed out through DEC programs and other agency and entities. From this site, it's environmentalbondact.ny.gov, and I think Leo will put it in the chat, and it'll be on my slide at the end again. We've provided a variety of resources, everything from the funding finder, which I think we referenced some folks to earlier in the chat in the questions and answers, a showing of projects where we invested funds. So you can look up and see what type of investments we are making in communities across the state. There's a page on our priorities, so you can touch back to that as really a touchstone of what we're prioritizing. And then additional resources. These are resources for resilience. One of the things that I usually make as a shameless plug is there's a sign up button on the bottom of this page, and that's true on the Bond Act website. You can sign up for updates. And that's important because, go ahead and go to the next slide. As we roll out funding opportunities, and I say we, I'm really talking about New York State. It might be a DEC program, it might be a joint DEC and EFC program, it might be a NYSERDA program. There's a wide range of ways in which we're investing funds. And you can see from here a couple of the programs that you've already, been referenced today. The two on the right, the Water Quality Improvement Project Grant Program and the Climate Smart Communities Grant Programs, I'll just highlight because they have a funding application deadline next week. So if you're interested in applying for those this round, make sure you get those applications in. There's also the Green Resiliency Grants through the Environmental Facilities Corporation that's looking at funding large transformative green infrastructure projects that really mitigate the impacts of climate change. And finally, the Electric School Bus Infrastructure or Electric School Bus Initiative It's really investing in buses and charging infrastructure across the state. The governor just this week announced additional funds from the Bond Act supporting that program, bringing the grand total to $500 million that we're investing in that program to provide funds to communities across the state. You can go to the next slide, please. The funding finder, which this is just a screenshot of it. It's available through that main page on the Bond Act. Really, our goal is to connect people with money, get people to get the resources they need to get projects in the ground. Many of the resources on this page are not actually Bond Act resources. There was a really handy tool that DEC colleagues created in Excel, and we wanted to really bring that to a web-based version to meet some accessibility issues that we saw with the Excel version, to really make it more broadly available. So hopefully we've succeeded in that. And please feel free to reach out if you have questions or comments on the funding finder. It includes a wide range of resources that you can sort or filter by applicant type, project type, both by regional area and so forth. You can go to the next slide, please. The other thing that I want to note, you saw on that previous slide that had kind of a highlight of funding closing soon or available now. As funding rounds close, they'll still be on that site, and you'll be able to look and say, okay, they offered it this time last year, and they anticipate offering it next year, so that you can start to plan ahead for funding opportunities that become available because of the investment that we all, as New Yorkers, are making across the state through the Environmental Bond Act. Go to the next slide, please. What we also do is, as we develop programs, we develop what's called an eligibility guideline. We publish those for public comment to figure out if we're hitting it right, if we're getting the program on the street that meets the needs that communities are seeing in terms of funding investments across the state. So as we roll out eligibility guidelines, we put those on the environmental notice bulletin through DEC. We also post them on the website. So please do check those out, sign up for updates, because that'll keep you abreast of what's coming down the pipeline. And last slide, I think, and yeah. Next steps, we keep going through an iterative process. We take the comments we've received through outreach that we did all over the state for our first year. We work with an interagency work group of state agency stakeholders and develop guidelines to put out there and get money on the street to help communities across the state to become more resilient and adapt to climate change. So I'll leave you at that and turn it back over to Lauren.
Thanks so much, Susanna, and huge thank you to all of our presenters today. Really, really great information, and we hope that you all enjoyed hearing about what DEC is doing for adaptation and resilience. Thanks for changing to the next slide. We're going to go into Q&A for a few minutes here. But I wanted to have this information up on the screen for you all. You can visit dec.ny.gov. That's the DEC's website. You can learn more about everything you heard today, plus a ton more. And also just remind you of our next webinar that Dishes will be hosting on Mitigate NY on August 19th. And you can register through the QR code or the link to the Adaptation Resilience Plan website that we'll put in the chat. And if you have any questions about the New York State Adaptation and Resilience Plan specifically, you can email the email address on the screen, which is nysadaptplan@dec.ny.gov. So now I would like to turn it over to Carolyn Frioli, the Assistant Director of the DEC Office of Climate Change, to facilitate Q&A. If you have any questions that you want to pose in the Q&A, just a quick reminder that that Q&A feature is accessible on the bottom right hand corner of your screen through that little circle with 3 dots in it. So over to you, Carolyn, if you want to take us through any questions that have come through for our panelists.
Thanks, Lauren. We actually received a number of really great questions, and we've been able to answer them as we've been going through the presentation. So I guess I would like to just give folks some more time if they have additional questions, or if any of the panelists want to maybe expand upon any of the answers, we can use that time to do that as well. But I think we've answered all of the questions. A lot of like program specific questions have come through. So we can just give it a little bit more time. And again, if any panelists want to expand, please feel free to do that.
And while folks are putting in questions that they might have, just again, a big thank you to everyone for attending, and a reminder that the recording of this webinar will be posted on the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan website soon. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to email us and reach out. Yeah, if you have no further questions, thanks again for joining us. And if you do, go ahead and put those in the Q&A. Thanks again, everyone.
I'm seeing a question from Michael. Not sure if this is directed to Susanna potentially about Bond Act funding. Does the program assist with community cooling sites that are interconnected with EMS agencies? Or if Michael, if you want to clarify who that question is directed towards. Okay, so the question for either Oliver or Marilyn. So looking to find out if any of the program grants can assist with community cooling sites that are interconnected with EMS agencies.
Hi, this is Marilyn with the Office of Environmental Justice. You can definitely take a look at our website regarding the Community Impact Grant. While that isn't necessarily something that is specifically called out to fund community cooling centers that are interconnected with EMS agencies, that is definitely a potential project proposal that we could look at based on the Community Impact Grant. I hope that answers your question.
Also, one other plug related to cooling sites. Those can actually be funded as well through the DEC Climate Smart Community Grant Program. And again, that opportunity closes at the end of this month. And then there's another question about polling results. I would say if folks are interested in seeing what the results look like, please feel free to reach out to us at the email address listed here and we can share those results with you. And Lauren, I think we're at the top of the hour. If you want to close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn, and thanks everyone for all your great questions and engagement. Stay tuned for more information about the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan. Go to the State Adaptation and Resilience Plan website through that QR code on your screen and through the links that we put in the chat, and sign up for updates via email through the DEC Delivers listserv for State Adaptation and Resilience Plan. And great to have you all with us this afternoon. Hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again to our presenters. Excellent work. And we're very proud to work along with you. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us.